Welcome to the Vital Voices Global Headquarters, our embassy for women's leadership. I'm Elise Nelson, President and CEO at Vital Voices, and we're thrilled to have you here, particularly because we know outside of this very special place that we call our home in the Equality Corridor, if you walk just right outside, turn on the news, listen to the loudest voices, what do we hear? We hear disinformation. We hear a rise of authoritarian regimes. We hear about conflict. We hear about division, disinformation. But what we know is that this rise of authoritarian regimes, this rise of disinformation, of conflict, of crisis, is only one side of the story. There's another side, and that is the rise of women leaders in our world today. Yeah. The rise of women who are speaking truth to power, women who are leading with purpose and passion and compassion, and are finding that little space where we can agree and come together across our differences. I'm so thrilled to announce the first panel. We've got two fabulous discussions this afternoon. But the first panel, we've got an extraordinary group of women, each of whom are truly leading the rise in their communities and countries. So first, let me welcome them, Priyanka Chaturvedi. She is a member of parliament from India. Please come. Maria Ressa, Nobel Peace Laureate and CEO of Rappler. Susanna Mohammed, she is a Minister for the Environment and Sustainability from Colombia. V. Pappas, former COO of TikTok. Musakua, president of the Khmer Movement for Democracy, former member of parliament, former minister for women's issues, longtime Vital Voices mother. And finally, Vital Voices founder, former Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Well, good afternoon. We are so happy to start off this discussion with four remarkable women who, as Elise said, are on the front lines of defending democracy in so many different ways and so many different settings. You know, more than half the world's population this year will go to the polls to vote in an election. Now, not all of those elections will be free or fair, but they will be posing a very clear challenge to all of us about the ongoing struggle between autocracy and democracy. And sadly, democracy is in decline. Fewer countries today are actual democracies than in the last several years. And according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, less than half the world lives in a democracy today. What's more, authorities, experts who chart this and study it over time, say that even those of us in democracies are seeing a decline in many of the hallmarks of our institutions and our values. So I think it's fair to say there's a backslide going on, and when democracies backslide, women's rights backslide. There is a direct correlation, and the stakes couldn't be higher, but we know that organizations like Vital Voices understand that women leaders are very often voices for change. Not all women leaders. Some of them are content with the status quo, content with male leaders, whether they're autocrats or oligarchs who want to turn the clock back on women. But we do know where women have a voice, where women have a vote, where women are willing to stand for and exercise leadership, democracy is in better shape. So I'm joined today by leaders who understand this because they're living it every single day. I want to start with Maria Ressa. You have called this year a tipping point for democracy, Maria. What is your sense of where things stand right now? And if you were to predict, how will democracy across the world stand and look like at the end of this year?
Even worse than when we first started talking about this. I think if you know, starting in 2016, I had come to America to say what's happening to us in the Philippines is coming for you, and it did. And now part of the problem is that the tech companies, big tech, which actually is the platform that now connects all of us. So we're talking two different types of AI coming at us, right? They've taken out the safety measures that were there in 2020. Mm-hmm. So we are more defenseless than we've ever been. And you know, if you know some of our work, I call social media a behavior modification system. It literally, this first version of AI hacked our biology to incite fear, anger, and hate, to change the way we feel, change the way we act, change the way we vote. There's a reason. VDEM in Sweden says that the world is now, 71% of the world is under authoritarian rule. So then you add generative AI, which started in, which was rolled out, the arms race in generative AI, and I'm so glad to hear from V, really rolled out November 2022. And what does that mean? Industrial scale disinformation. It is like a sneeze now to roll out 1 million crap. Right? We're, to quote Cory Doctorow, the enshittification of the internet. It's really in full bloom. And a paper came out January this year that said, this is before generative AI really kicked in, 57.1% of the internet is now low quality content. So we are going to the polls with less facts, less news, because that's another data point I can share with you, and more propaganda, more information operations. And that means, so the last part to your question is, that little window to protect democracy, it is closing. And we have to act. And I think that is why, you know, these incredibly strong women in the room, this is it. And there are two ways we can go, democracy or fascism. Mm. And it is actually that simple. Madeleine Albright was the one that really forced me to use the word fascism, right? And when we do this, if democracy fails, it'll be at least a decade. And we will not have the ability to address climate change, real existential problems. So please, that's what I would like. We gotta act.
She doesn't feel too strongly about the threat and the danger, but she's doing everything she can to sound the alarm and try to get us all to pay attention. Sukua, you've paid an incredible price in fighting for democracy in Cambodia. Since 2017, you've been living in exile. You're one of the many opposition leaders who were forced out of the country by the current regime. I really think your story, your experiences help bring the stakes of this moment into very sharp relief. You and I have known each other for a number of years. I have watched with great admiration how first inside your country you tried to make change. Now you're continuing to try to make change from outside. You have never stopped speaking out. What can you tell us now about the situation in Cambodia, and how are you and others trying to put together and lead a movement for a democratic dawn in Cambodia's authoritarian darkness?
Secretary Clinton, thank you for giving me the chance to say to the world that Hun Manet, who pretends to be the Prime Minister of Cambodia, was not democratically elected by the people of Cambodia. His father put him into that position. His father, Hun Sen, who was still the strong man of Cambodia for 40 years, had a whole scenario which was to establish not just autocracy, but a dynasty. So in 2017, he got rid of the civil society. Secretary Clinton, you were in Cambodia. You saw how vibrant civil society, the independent media was. He got rid of Hun Sen, got rid of all that, and dissolved the opposition party that I used to belong to for 20 years. And that's why I find myself in exile. The leader of the opposition is under house arrest, sentenced to 27 years. I'm sentenced to 47 years in prison. Other members sentenced to life. That's number one. So as far as the Cambodian people are concerned, we do not have a democratically elected president. And the world, the international community needs to take that into serious consideration. You don't just go in and keep on engaging with the son of a dictator. That's number one. Number two, when we keep talking about democracy, I want to put it in the lives, the real life, the everyday life of the women of Cambodia or anywhere in the world. The most serious violations of human rights that Hun Manet, Hun Sen, the Hun family are committing against the people of Cambodia, the women of Cambodia, is the deforestation. Massive, massive. Cambodia is losing its forests at the rate of 0.8% per year. Only maybe one-third of the forest of Cambodia is still there. Forced evictions. They're taking the land of the people for development, the so-called development. Every day, you hear of women that are trying to hang on to the lake, to the little pot of land, to the forest, the last part of the forest. Around the city of Phnom Penh, there used to be all these lakes, and they are now filled in for development. And part of this filled-in land or lake is given to Hun Sen and his family. From our side, we have been fighting, and I was a member of parliament as well. We have been fighting for the dignity of our women, for the dignity of our people. And that's what it translates to democracy. You have to put it into real life. When the women at the very last moment cannot even hang on to that piece of the lake where they used to make a living out of the lotus flowers, because we pray, we use lotus flowers, of the small fishes that they make less than $5 a day, now zero. And these women, these urban poor, are in jail. Also, the indigenous people, the indigenous women, are also in jail. And the indigenous women, they live on the forest. Everything is taken out of their hands, of their dignity. Even the tomb of the ancestors is taken under the excuse of development. Turned into plantation, turned into casinos, turned into brothels. That's Cambodia today. It's not the end yet. But what I would like to say is the court of Cambodia is a weapon. It's a weapon for the Hun family, and even no one can talk. Yesterday, 5 environmentalists, most of them are very young, are back in jail. For what? For defending the forest, for defending the environment. And they're already charged for treason. Found guilty, sentenced to 25 years. Now, it's not, if we only talk about that, then we give up. We don't give up. That's why, since I've been in exile for 7 years now, we've been talking about what is democracy. It's bigger than the opposition party. Yeah. Democracy is the world, is the people of Cambodia, or the friends of Cambodia who want to help Cambodia be a better Cambodia, a Cambodia that has justice, a Cambodia where the land belongs to the people, where the children can have school, when the children do not, the young girls have not have to witness their parents, their mothers, trashed down to the floor, to the ground, so by the military. It is so emotional at the same time, but it helps us put the strategy for the Khmer movement for democracy that I'm leading, and for the past just 3 months now, is an umbrella to unite the Cambodians who are in the diaspora. There are about 3 million of us. Why do we keep silent? We cannot. Democracy is not about being silent. It's not about living in fear. Democracy is about being loud. Democracy is about all of us together, together and say, call a cat a cat, call a dog, and call a dynasty. And that's not what Cambodia needs. So the movement for democracy, the Khmer movement for democracy, unite. And we're outside. We can talk. We can speak. I am being, this Radio Free Asia now, who was kicked out of Cambodia, they're here today. And tonight, they will be hearing us, me, in Cambodia. If I were in Cambodia, I would be dead or in jail. But I have to speak. I'm with you all. But we have to speak. We cannot be silent.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing. And V, I want to get your perspective. You've obviously had an insider's view as a leader shaping major platforms like YouTube and TikTok. Look, we all know that these tools, these spaces have the power to be both creative and destructive, to be, conveyors of accurate information or disinformation. What trends do you see in terms of how these platforms are shaping culture and democracies around the world, and that the role they're playing in the elections this year?
Great. So yes, and I know this is a topic close to your heart, but when we look at the trends, and certainly over the near 20 years, we've seen the evolution of these open platforms. And on the positive side, what we've seen is that they've enabled a voice for marginalized groups, right? And the democratization of content. And that's been incredible, and we've seen the impact of that it's had in terms of social justice movements. Certainly, if we look at Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter movement, to Me Too, and obviously the war that's happening in Gaza right now and the protests surrounding it. The ability for these platforms to enable the mobilization of support and raise awareness is critical. But at the same time, the same tools that empower us can polarize us, right? And so there needs to be checks and balances as we think about these platforms. The absolute scale and size is unprecedented in the impact that they can have. And I think one of the concerning trends that I see and that we are a witness to is that freedom of speech is essentially being weaponized, right? And we see this with the hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, and extremist rhetoric that is being enabled on these platforms and justified under the guise of freedom of speech, which works to undermine our democracy. And so for us, I think we really need action as we think about not just preserving the spaces for marginalized voices to continue, but look at how are these these expressions being weaponized, and actually take stronger action against harmful content. And I think this is such a critical moment, given the elections that we are facing at the moment, and given the threats that we are seeing to democracy.
Well, I certainly agree with that, V. We've got to figure out how to mobilize the political support to actually do that. Priyanka, you are a first-time member of parliament in India, and you've quickly become an important part of the opposition alliance there. And what I have seen is that this is an alliance where some of the strongest voices are coming from women-led political parties. As we speak here today, the elections are ongoing in India. What are you hearing about that? What do you see as the likely outcome of the elections? How will that affect India's future? And what role do you think women can and will play in India's democracy?
So two important things. We are in the middle of the election. We are going to have the last phase of election. It has been a long drawn election. And by 4th June, we know which way we are heading. And seriously, I was listening to everyone here, and especially when we was talking about how these tools which were meant to empower are now heading towards disempowering a whole lot of voices, especially women on social media platforms. I have been seeing immense amount of trolling happen, and yet in India, women are fighting back. They are pushing back such voices, which are trying to control what the narrative should be. So this election becomes extremely important. We went into an election thinking that looks like a very easy third term for the party which is in power, which has focused on concentration of power, reducing the civil society to the bare minimum. We are seeing the media also not being free. However, we have fought back. The opposition is fighting back. We are strongly pushing back to all the mechanisms and tools which democracy also has given to them to silence us. So we're hoping for a positive outcome. And I, like Maria was saying, that this would be a year which will decide which way democracy is heading globally. So we can have various models of democracy as long as it looks at empowering voices, not disempowering a society. So our model of democracy might be very different from how US looks at it or how Europe looks at it. However, we believe that democracy in India, which is so diverse, so culturally different from going from each state to another state. And yes, it is heartening that women are pushing back. We have women leaders, not many women leaders, but those women leaders are choosing to be the voice of sanity and pushing back on anything which is disempowering how human rights should be functioning, how agencies should be functioning, how democratic tools and constitutional norms should be functioning.
I really like your use of the word disempowering and obviously empowering, because political systems, information systems, they can all disempower or empower. And I think that's an interesting frame to think about this. Susanna, let me turn to you now, because you're in the cabinet of the government in Colombia, and you are leading efforts from the inside to advance climate justice. Obviously, this goes far beyond any country's borders, but you have proven to be a very determined advocate for the kind of climate responses that are needed. How do you approach looking at climate, particularly when you think about it with respect to women, peace, security, democracy, because climate cuts across all of those concerns? And what's the best argument that you can make in your own government and to other governments? We've been fighting about climate change for so long. We've made not enough progress, as you know, but there are bright spots and there are people who are trying to really make a difference, but we still have to keep making the argument. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing, what you're doing, and how it fits into the larger global framework.
For a country like Colombia, I say that we are in one of the worst positions in this climate transition. We are a country that is very geographically diverse and very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And at the same time, we are one of the countries that have not caused this crisis. So there's always this issue of the climate justice between those that were able to consume all the carbon space that we have and the countries that are now, and the peoples that are now dealing with the consequences. But we are also the 5th largest coal exporter, and we are one of the top 30 exporters of oil. And we have created this trap where actually, if the world goes to decarbonization, our economy will be ruined because our fiscal space depends on those incomes for those exports. So at the same time, we are dealing every day with the crisis, and I have to say that 2023 and 2024, I can see how there are tipping points in the climate situation. We have observed phenomenon that we have not seen before. For example, having the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean at record heights of temperature at the same time. We just have faced a Niño phenomenon that had wildfires in Colombia, water scarcity in places such as Bogota, a city and a metropolitan area of 10 million people. We have never seen that before. And we are moving very fast to Niña phenomenon, which is extreme weather in rain. And the temperature keeps going up at unprecedented rates. So the question we have asked ourselves is, what happens if the world decarbonizes with the producers and exporters that its economy depends, actually including this country, which has become a top exporter of fossil fuels? And then what is the answer from the international system? What is currently the consequences of climate change to the people most vulnerable? And what I have to say is the country has increased exponentially its debt, its foreign debt, is trying to deal at the same time with fiscal space to respond to the crisis, is highly indebted, and is in this trap of export of fossil fuel, which we have to phase out according to the international agreements. So that's why I say we are in the worst of the worlds, because it's not only about an energy transition, it's an economic transition, and deep inside is a change in the way we live. The way we live is all based on fossil fuels, everything. The way we travel, the way we build, the way we eat, the way we dress, the way we live a modern life is based on fossil fuels, and that needs to phase out, and we have very little time. So how do we do that? And we decided to do a bold move. I was speaking to the Prime Minister of Marshall Islands that also did that bold move 4 days ago, and it's that we joined as a country to an initiative called the Non-Proliferation of Fossil Fuels Treaty. That is to say that we have to see fossil fuels right now similar to how we saw arms of mass destruction or nuclear weapons, because that is actually destroying the very fundamentals of life in the planet, which sustain everything else. We are very few countries. There's only 13 countries. It started in the Pacific Islands, who are existentially threatened by climate change because of the sea level rise. Their cultures, their tradition will disappear. And at the same time, we are one of the first oil exporters and coal exporters that joined the claim for a treaty to actually change the international economic relations so that we can phase out effectively fossil fuels. Because if a country like Colombia says today, as we did actually last year, we're going to stop signing exploration contracts, immediately the credit rating agencies have come back and say your economy, which sustains itself on fossil fuels, is not reliable anymore. We're going to increase the cost of capital, and because of doing that, at the same time, you get deeper into debt. So how are you going to do the transition? We said in Dubai, we have to triple renewables. And I was asking, who's going to triple renewables? 80% of the capital for renewables is invested in the north. And what's happening to the countries like ours, which are in this fossil fuel trap? And what's going to happen to our people? We have seen exponentially the growth of migrants through the Panama border with Colombia. And part of that is the Venezuelan crisis, but part of that is also the fossil fuels and the climate change situation. So in that perspective, our work has been to take care internally for a movement. For us, our main responsibility in this global issue is taking care of biodiversity and forest. This is our main responsibility. So we have worked with a social movement inside. We're going to launch it at COP16, that is the biodiversity COP, where we are hosting, which is called making peace with nature coalition as the first step, and we are making opportunities for the people of Colombia around taking care of nature and building nature. But on the other hand, we are working on creating the platform and the capacity and the reality of the economics of how we phase out fossil fuels, and what does that really mean in terms of economic crisis and in terms of the different situations of countries. We said at COPs that we're going to phase out fossil fuel. We said it for the first time in Dubai in 30 years. But actually, when you go and say, how do we do this? Then the answer is that we are not doing this. We are expanding fossil fuels 110% more than what we need to fulfill the Paris agreements. Why? Because getting out of fossil fuels is changing the whole economic relationships. Who's going to make the first move? And this is the question.
Well, first of all, that was one of the best explanations that I've heard about the real challenges dealing with the economic, social, political obstacles in actually doing a transition. And I'm really appreciative, Susanna, of your willingness and your ability to explain that, because I was at COP28. They did adopt the phase out of fossil fuels. The money doesn't follow the commitment. Yes. It doesn't go to the global south. It doesn't support the economic systems of countries like yours that find themselves in this really difficult dilemma. So you really are an important representative, but also messenger for what needs to be done here. I want to quickly just ask each of you to respond to kind of a follow-up question, because there's so much. We could literally have this conversation go on for hours, but we don't have that kind of time. But Maria, you've dedicated your life at great risk to trying to defend fact-based, evidence-based journalism. And journalism is in a terrible crisis, and you are doing the best you can through your outlet of Rappler in the Philippines. But just explain to us what we need from journalism and how we do a better job protecting journalists. Maria was a guest lecturer in a class that I co-teach at Columbia with, I think Karen is still here, Karen Yarhi-Milo, who's the dean at the School of International and Public Affairs. And as she might remember, she talked about the importance of defending facts, evidence, truth, but she also talked about the critical role of journalists. And several young people in our Q&A period basically said, I'd love to be a journalist, but the country that I live in, journalists get killed. The number of journalists, and not just in war, we're not just talking about Ukraine or Gaza or Sudan, we're talking about countries that have high rates of violence against journalists. So if you could, Maria, just maybe give us a few thoughts about that.
Wow, it's the core, right? I think three things. The first is understand that I think the data shows us that by the end of the year, digital news may die. So the first is the business model. The second, and quickly on that, there are only three ways a news site gets traffic, or any website gets traffic. It's direct, social, or search. Direct, you have, that's the smallest for any news site. But the second, social media. Starting January last year, Meta, the world's largest distributor of news, started choking traffic to news. And the third is search, right? Google just placed its generative AI search on top of search, and they just rolled it out a week and a half ago. What this means is that you will now have a chatbot, like all of our websites have been crawled, thrown into the large language models. You may or may not get an accurate answer, but a chatbot will tell you, but you won't get the link until it's like beyond where you scroll. So that means existential, what you heard from climate, it's journalism. The second part is that more and more journalists have to be okay with the danger. I was just in Copenhagen yesterday morning. The dinner the night before was with a guy who's already been pushed out of Nicaragua. Chamorro is, there's so many. The second is a guy who is in Pakistan who has to have closed-in security. You know, when I'm in Manila, I have closed-in security. And the one hope, because I got to give you hope, right? A Brazilian woman, Patricia Campos Melo, who was attacked online, filed a case against Bolsonaro, father and son, and won. And won, right? So, but it's still there's still, so what the second part there is that we keep trying, but there are very few ways to keep the business model alive. So Mark Thompson, who wasn't head of CNN when we began this, but Mark Thompson and I started the International Fund for Public Interest Media. Democratic states throwing in money. We raised about $50 million. We are giving that out to news organizations in the Global South primarily. The third one is this. What you are seeing is not just the attack on the business model, but an attack on trust. It's the reason why you went to news organizations in the first place. But every time you see, and let me bring it to all of our countries, the thing that was built by tech for advertising and marketing, that all the data shows us that, you know, algorithms like friends of friends splinter open society. What's the goal of nation states like Russia, China, Iran? It is to pound open the fracture lines of societies. This is how death by 1,000 cuts happens in each of our countries. And in America, it was in 2016, Black Lives Matter. And what happened? Both sides of Black Lives Matter was pounded open by Russian disinformation. It wasn't about making you believe one thing. It was about making you distrust everything so that you cannot act. That's civil society. That lack of trust is killing us. News. If you are angry, don't post. Get offline, you know? Because I gotta tell you, America is a little bit worse than the Philippines under the worst of Duterte right now. And the fracture lines that we see is Gaza, immigration, and race.
Wow. Well, Vi, I want to turn to you now because Maria suggested this, and everywhere I go, literally in the world, women in public life, whether it's politics, government, or even any area of society or the economy where they gain some notoriety, where they're, you know, they've got a name, they are doing something, they are subjected to the most repulsive online violence, threats against them, against their families. And, you know, many of us have raised this for quite some time, and there seems to be little or no interest, but it's gotten to the point where, you know, a lot of women are afraid to go into the public sphere. If they're in the public sphere, it's like what Maria just said, they have to have security, and a lot of them can't afford that. I mean, this is a downward spiral that is being, unfortunately, hyped up by the algorithms, by the kind of messaging that is out there. So how can we make life online, offline, safer, not just for women and girls, but for everybody?
It's a great question and such a critical one when we think about who are having these conversations and how do we have the right people be able to have their voices heard, right? And we want the reason why addressing online violence, which disproportionately impacts women and girls, the importance of addressing that is because we want that equality, and that really is what upholds democracy, right? The ability for us to all have that voice. It is a challenge that is accelerating. So the not so great news here is that if we look at where we are today, there's been an acceleration of online violence. And why is that happening? I think there's a couple of reasons. One, in the last 12 to 18 months, I would say a lot of the platforms have actually pulled back in meaningful ways when we think about the policies that protect online people online, as well as the actual investment in content moderation. Yeah. And so we've seen layoffs happen throughout the tech industry, and certainly these groups are particularly at risk and have been reduced in size. So that's one reason. At the same time, we've seen an acceleration of technology. So we've seen the advancements of AI and the ability for things like non-consensual pornography and deepfakes to proliferate at a rate that we've never seen before. And so this is a really critical conversation to be having on how to address it. And so what needs to happen? I think there's three things. One, the tech platforms themselves need accountability and transparency in terms of what they're doing. And to do that, we need the research and advocacy groups, as well as the government, to hold them accountable. And there needs to be investment in that front. When we think about the governments around the world, legislation needs to happen. There is not enough protections currently. So in the US, for example, there is no national law protecting against things like non-consensual pornography, and it's done at the state level. So these are the concerns and areas that we should be focused on. And then finally, public awareness and education needs to happen. I think the younger that we get in the education system to teach our kids about the harms or potential harms of being online will only help in terms of helping them navigate how to be in these spaces and to enable them to have those voices, which is so critical for where we are in society today.
I agree with that. And Priyanka, you've been working on legislation, right,
Yes.
in India, to address online violence. What do you want your government to do, and how can we figure out ways to, both protect women but also raise awareness? So, as Vijay said, people can better protect themselves.
So two things I'd like to mention here. My own career trajectory in politics began from social media. Twitter was a very empowering tool for me to have a voice. In India, back home, most of the women come from political backgrounds, people who are supporting them, families who come from, dynasties, as you say, are the ones who get the support. So I was somebody who was an absolute nobody coming into the system by using these social media platforms. So internet for good. But the same internet for good turned into tragic consequences where I started to face a lot of online trolling, a lot of systematic hate sent my way. Threats of rape, threats of character assassination, everything. Have seen it all. So I've seen the good and the bad. My idea and my suggestion through my private members bill has been that just like we have civil societies, we need to understand that our generation and moving on, the generations will live on digital platforms, digital societies. So we need to ensure that there are consequences. We inculcate, education as part of, digital models as part of our curriculum, education curriculum. From the second grade upwards, people should know how to behave on these platforms. And if you do not, there are going to be consequences. I'll give you just one example if we have the time. There was a case which happened in India where women who are from minorities, women who are Muslims, were facing photographs taken of them and were being bullied on social media. They were being bet upon. There were vile comments coming on them just because they had a very strong political opinion to make. I took that up, and the government was taking it very lightly. I took it up, and we saw that action was taken. The point is, when we realized who these people were, who the culprits were, they were 21-year-olds, 20-year-olds who had absolutely no idea the consequences of their behavior on social media or on digital platforms. So till you don't instill the idea of, there are going to be consequences of your behavior. If you go steal, you're going to have a jail term to serve. Similarly, if you behave badly on digital media, you try to bully people, there are going to be consequences. So that's my private members bill, which includes curriculum, behavior, as well as the consequences that come with it. Because increasingly we're moving towards that direction. Thank you, sir.
Well, big round of applause for consequences. Quickly, Sukua, what is your sense of the role that digital media, or as you pointed up, traditional media can play in your efforts to try to support the people of Cambodia?
Oh, a whole lot. 75% of our youth have access to Facebook. Although the government, when I say the government, I mean Hun Sen and his son. That's it. Can go after us anytime. Most of the political prisoners, activists who are in jail now is because their accounts have been hacked and the comments have been followed, and they are charged for defamation and so on. But having said that, what we have learned is that each time from outside, although we can say whatever we want, we are teaching our youth who are from outside, our women who are from outside, how to message this change, not through hate, not through more fear, not through more anger. We have had enough of it. Cambodia have gone through genocide, for armed conflicts, just have enough of it. So what we have to do, what we're doing now is we have a team, we meaning the movement movement for democracy. We have a media team, young people who are getting experts from our supporters and message, do podcasts, do real day-to-day live, even if it's 1 minute. What is it like to take? We were on the Hill last week. There was the House just passed a bill for Israel, and there were those who were not for Israel. There was a confrontation, and the young people were there from our group, and they witnessed the whole thing. I said, take the picture, take that video, and put it on your Facebook right now, so the people inside Cambodia can say, see, we want that. We don't want to have to go to jail because we want to support, we want to protect Cambodia from China. Why can't we? Only the people of Cambodia can protect Cambodia from China. There are enormous challenges, but I think that's why the role of the Khmer Movement for Democracy is to have a mission. The mission is to inform and educate, which is educate the people from inside and outside. I say about 3 million of us are outside. Our force, this is our forces. And teaching the women, Cambodian women who are outside, the role of democracy, even though they have been in democracy for so long, but they're still traditional Khmer women. And to say, you can come, you can go to the Hill, and go to the Hill and talk to your congressman. Call the congressman and say, support the Democracy Act for Cambodia. By the way, please call your congressman and say, support the Democracy Act. I have a team here. I don't know, Kim Hun is here. She's leading, and she's a part of Vital Voices, leading the Cambodian women team to every single office at the Hill. And what is also very, very important is to get this generation. They are like second generation Cambodian women. We have the Youth Academy. I am so pleased because this young woman, the movement is about 3 months old. And this young woman is now with us, and she is going to mobilize young Cambodian students from high school, universities, and say, come, join the movement. Save Cambodia with us. You don't have. We are Cambodian. We need to bring the soul of Cambodia back. And the soul of Cambodia is about the land. The soul of Cambodia is about the lake. The soul of Cambodia is about our women, not having to go to work as factory workers or worse of it, in brothels, or escape Cambodia to work as migrant workers in Thailand. There are 2 million of us. And it just hurts you. You cannot be, but that's why it's important to mobilize. And with digital media, you can do a mass education, but with a lot of accountability and a lot of training. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Susanna. Susanna, before we close, you gave a very realistic accounting, but where do you see hope? Where do you think, through better mobilization, better information outreach, we can do more on climate change, before it gets even worse?
I get hope from the people on the field and in the front lines, because I am seeing how people are adapting, how people are resilient, how people are willing in their hearts to fight for nature, to work with nature. I'm talking, for example, to these peasants that are in the Amazon of Colombia, trying to change the way they produce and live so that they don't deforestate, but that they actually create a new type of economy in a place where we're trying to consolidate the peace process that we had with FARC in 2016, and how they get it and how they understand it. And the women also in the wetlands and the people on the field understand this because they are living it. They are living the lack of water, they are living the change in the climate, they understand how the whole crop production has been disturbed, they are seeing the effects, and they know and they want to do something. So I think these multilateral negotiations, we need to bring the people that are at the forefront of climate disaster to the center and put the voice there. That's part of the work we are doing. We're going to host COP16 in Colombia on biodiversity, and our commitment is that it's going to be the people's COP. We want these indigenous people that have 80% of the biodiversity in the world in their hands. We want these women to be at the center of the process. It's not easy because diplomacy, I think, is the art of hiding conflict, and is the art of hiding geopolitical interests under the carpet rather than confronting the conflict and rather than confronting the situation. And also I find hope in young people because they understand already that in decades these planets will not be recognizable. Many places will be uninhabitable just because of the temperature. People will lose their traditions, their land, and young people know that this is in their lifetimes. People that were born already in this century are going to experience this. So they understand the urgency. And finally, somehow, maybe in a naive way, I still think that politics. We need to get back control from politics. And politics is the art to creating the rules of the game, to make agreements, to make pacts. And we need a global pact. We need an international capacity of politics to mobilize. Unfortunately, today is the markets who rule, not the politics. We need to recover back the capacity of politics, of course, within these democratic challenges, with this authoritarianism that go hand in hand with denying the climate crisis. And this is the most acute danger that we have. But it's also, the opposition makes a lot of fun of me and said, this activist who follows Greta Thunberg. Yeah, I was very inspired by Greta. Why? Yeah, I can recognize it publicly. I was very inspired when she was 15 years old because she taught me something, and you have to die with the boots on. And this is the thing. So we just have to put our boots on and continue working and fighting whatever it comes.
Well, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all so much. Wow, put your boots on. Put your boots on. That's pretty amazing.
Please, if you can stay on your seats because we're going to have the last conversation of the day. We're just going to quickly reset here. But please don't leave the room because this is going to be super inspirational and we have a couple of surprises. Yeah, but I don't think there's any way I'm gonna make it. I'd have to like be in the car by 3:15. That's right. I mean, I don't want to screw up the timing. It should be a proper panel. Are you ready for the last conversation of the day? So please take your seats because this one promised to be a very inspiring and beautiful conversation. When women rise, please join me in welcoming author and co-host of Morning with Mika, MSBC and Vital Voices board member, Huma Abedin. She will be joined by author and vice president of NBC Universal, Bonnie Hammer, chairman, Universal Studios and Universal Film Entertainment, and chief content officer, and Vital Voices board member, Donna Langley. And we have the founder, designer, author, and board member of Vital Voices, Diane von Furstenberg. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's working. Can you hear me? Hi, Kate. I didn't see you earlier, and you're very chic. Our board chair. Always happy to see Kate. You know, it's always hard. I'm like Elise. I am a Hillary Clinton. What is the right word? Product. I was also 28 years ago as a young intern in the White House, and here I am, and it really is an honor and a privilege to be part of the closing panel here. And in part, one of the reasons I think, Elisa, was very, very smart to close with this panel is we've spent 2 days talking about some of the greatest challenges of our time. We've talked about conflict and trauma and how to prevent online violence. And really a lot of very heavy topics and mostly impacting women in our world today. And I think it is all the more reason it's important to end with a discussion with really inspiring icons. 3 women who, I mean, really, they've showed us so many things, but they've shaped industries, they've shaped culture, they tell stories in ways that we may not think of doing ourselves. And so for those of you who don't know, I work on a show called Morning Mika, and in part we talk about women knowing their value, how important that is. And I had an experience just now backstage, and this is why this conversation is so important. And this young woman said to me, I've worked with her for 20 years, and she says, you know, I don't feel smart or worthy enough to be at this conference. These women are so, they're so impressive. And you are. I mean, we all, you know, everyone in this room is impressive. And that's why these conversations are important. It's us all reminding each other. And one of the things we talked about on Morning Mika this morning was this new report that shows that anxiety has gone to #1 on the list of reasons of mental health issues for women skipping work. And there's been a 300% increase since 2017 and 2023 of women not showing up. So it's anxiety, depression, relationship issues, general psychological issues. And very simple tools to fix that. And one of them being having women showing us the way. And that's these three women right here. Diane, I'm going to start with you, even though you're looking away from me. Okay.
I felt like this girl who told you that after this panel. I said, what am I doing here?
You need to talk to her after this.
No,
She's
what
back
am
there.
I doing here?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So you have always been somebody who not only has lived life on your own terms, you refuse to settle. You have broken down doors, you've broken down ceilings. You were 22 years old when you basically changed the entire fashion industry. You created one iconic look, this wrap dress, that till today represents a woman's independence and I think power and individuality. So recently, you said in an interview, you were asked what it was like to have championed women, and you said, I've championed being a woman. So can you tell us what you meant by that? And how are the two things connected?
I don't remember saying that, but
yeah, this is also a vintage time.
Listen, to tell you the truth, I feel I championed myself and my life every day. I mean, I'm an old woman. I'm 77 years old. And I've had a very full life, so I should be 300 years old. And I still don't know. And the more you know, the less you know. And you know, you're not chosen where you're born. You're not chosen who your parents are. You're not chosen a lot of things. You know, you're not master of your destiny, but what you're master of is how to navigate. How to navigate everyday circumstances, things, and so I'm still navigating. I'm exhausted navigating.
But Diane, I think one of the things that you do so well is you're constantly pushing yourself to learn and grow and change. You're never still, and I think that's a good way to live in the world, and I feel like you're constantly sharing that advice with those.
Listen,
she tells me all kinds of things that I think are insane, and then in 10 years, I am like, this woman was so right. And so I have to thank you for that as one of your mentees. You want the very specific story? We're going to go there. But then we need stories from everybody. This is not going to just be me. But Diane gave me this advice, which I didn't take. And it's actually, I don't think I've ever said this, maybe one of my greatest regrets. I was 6 weeks pregnant when my marriage fell apart. And I had my little boy 8 months later. And I saw Diane. Here I was, like I couldn't fit in any of my clothes. I was exhausted nursing this baby. And I didn't know if I was going to stay in my marriage or not. And I go see Diane at some fancy event. She looks amazing. She's standing with Barry. I think he rolled his eyes when you told me this, but she said, I don't care what you do in your marriage. I don't care. But have another baby. And I remember looking at her and thinking, what? And she said, well, you should have another baby. Then they can be together. And your son can have a sibling. And I got to tell you, 13 years later, and I've said this to you privately, I wish I took that advice. So that's a very specific example.
All right.
You ask, you get.
I give a lot of advices. I'm just like, I'm like my mother. I give advice all the time, which I used to hate hearing from her, but I'm worse. So what's the
what did
question?
your mom? What was advice your mom gave you that you hated?
No, the best advice my mother gave me is two. One is fear is not an option. Yeah. She would never allow me to be afraid. Yeah. If I was afraid of the dark, she would lock me in the closet. Today she could go to jail for that. But I am thankful because once you're in the closet, first of all, it doesn't stay dark. And if it is, what's wrong with dark? You know? Yeah. So that was the first thing. And as a result, I push away fear. don't have really fear. The second advice is no matter what, never be a victim. And my mother was in Auschwitz at the age of 21. She stayed, she worked her way out at Auschwitz. She worked in a bullet factory, in a Krupp factory. Then she went through the death march because they were losing the war, and then another camp and another camp. Anyway, she stayed 13 months in the camps. By the time she was liberated, she weighed 49 pounds. And so she wasn't supposed to survive, but she did. Yeah. And that's why she said, no matter what, never be a victim. Yeah. And she came back to Belgium, and her fiancé came back. They got married after 6 months, and the doctor said, you have to wait 3 years to have a child because you will die and your child will not be normal. And 9 months later, I was born, and I was not normal. I mean, you know, it's... now, what I want to say is that I don't know why. My mother also used to say, I don't understand. You never tell me, you never tell your family anything, and then you go on television and you tell the world everything. And I realized, I was thinking last week, I said, it's true. I never say anything, and yet I say everything. Yeah, sure. And so, for whatever reason, I have used my life and my experiences, and I've shared them. And I don't know. It's been my destiny. I did the best I could. The best thing I did, my best samples are my family. Yeah. I have 2 children and 5 grandchildren, and they're pretty wonderful.
I can agree with that. We're gonna come back to your story, but Donna. Diane said the word fear, and there are a lot of people who believe that fear drives a lot of people in Hollywood, right? You're only as successful as your latest project, and what's said about you is you are driven by integrity, strategic thinking, compassion, and the love of film. And anyone who does not know this woman's story needs to know her story, because she showed up at 22 years old with no contacts in Los Angeles. All she knew is she wanted to be in film, and she wanted to create and be a storyteller. And here she sits with us today. She is arguably the most powerful woman in Hollywood. She made history.
That's the truth.
Anyone you ask will agree with that statement who knows anything about her work, but also you made history as the first British woman to run a Hollywood studio. And I've read somewhere that you eat Marmite sandwiches and enjoy them, so you were definitely authentic. But it seems very easy looking at you now. You were rightly honored in Cannes last week by the Caring Foundation, as you should be. But that could not have been easy to navigate. And can you share some of the early days and how you went from kind of being this 22-year-old to where you're sitting today?
Well, if we had another 2 days, but no, I think this idea of fearlessness it's a good theme. I think it fits in with the theme that Elise has set forward for these few days. I agree with Dion. Fear is not really an option. And, all of the descriptors, and by the way, thank you very much for that. But, the way that I'm described as a powerful woman in Hollywood, I don't define myself that way, right? I never have. And, I think in many ways, when you're a bit outside of the system, which I felt like I was, I did show up with no contacts in Hollywood. I did not get to where I am through any normal real channels. I did. There's sort of typical ways that you can become a senior executive in Hollywood, and I didn't do any of those things. And so I think in a way that kind of atypical journey that I had was very liberating. I wasn't following in anyone else's footsteps. First of all, I didn't ever think that I would be in this role. In fact, somebody asked me very early in my career, there was a few of us sitting around, and we were just having one of those kind of career and life conversations. And I remember a good friend of mine who did end up running a studio, she was asked, do you want to run a studio? Absolutely, I'm going to do it. And the stakes were always very high for her, I remember. And somebody, I was asked the same question. I said, probably not. No, I think I'm going to go into independent film when I'm done here. And, who knows? I really just didn't have a prescription for where I was going. And that's not to say that I was indecisive or I didn't have ambition, because I did. I just didn't know which. I was kind of okay with, letting the past guide me. And so I really am the sort of girl least likely to have the job that I have. It is kind of funny, but it wasn't. But it's not easy. Fighting your way through the glass ceiling, the patriarchy, the systems that have been in place that continue. The which one?
Condescendence.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Yes. No. On a daily basis. It doesn't go away, by the way. All of those things. Those were all challenges. Those were all things that I had to navigate and get through. I think I love the way that diplomacy was described earlier in the last panel. Yeah. I can relate to that. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Politics, same thing. Not quite on the same global scale or with the same global stakes associated with it. Of course, we're just making great films, hopefully. But it's been a journey, and it's been mostly fun.
But it's also interesting because you always believed in yourself. I mean, I think one of the things you said, you credit your success to delusional self-belief. But I think that helped you steer your way through maybe some expected choices that you made professionally, and that you've also shared with us that healthy competition's actually good. And I remember that in politics was certainly the case. Elise will remember this. When we were in the White House, nobody told you how to do the next job. You were just thrown into it. And you either sank or you swam. And that's how you showed success. And I think there's a real lesson in there, especially for the young women in the room, that you should be open to doing things